Hello, friends, and welcome back to Page Chewing. Today we will be discussing H.P. Lovecraft, and it's my first time reading H.P. Lovecraft, so we wanted to get together with some friends and discuss Cthulhu and the mythos and H.P. Lovecraft, and I'm sure we'll get into lots of other topics that I can't think of at this moment. So we'll start off with the introductions, and Jose, will you start us off, please?
Thank you, Steve. I'm Jose. I run the Jose's Amazing Worlds YouTube channel where I do book and comic reviews. And I also host the Fantasy Talks live podcast where I mainly concentrate on author interviews and book discussions with people such as a certain John Houlihan, a games designer and Cthulhu mythos writer. So you can check that out in any main podcast platform.
Nice. And John, will you give us an introduction?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my name's John Houlihan. I'm a writer, sci-fi and fantasy writer, and occasional H.P. Lovecraft aficionado. And I also work as a games designer for the British tabletop and role-playing game company called mythos. And I do moonlight once in a while as a video game scriptwriter and designer as well.
Oh, nice. Lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff. So I guess I'm the only new person in the group, right? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Which I felt a slight sense of responsibility in suggesting like where to begin with Lovecraft, right? So I think just to clarify, when you initially asked the question like what to read, I suggested two short stories, The Pigman Model and The Call of Cthulhu, and then two of the novellas, Shadow over Innsmouth and Dunwich Horror. But I think you also read The Whisperer in Darkness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. It was on my list. Somehow I wrote it down. I'm not sure how that happened, but I read it too.
So, I don't know, like, John, for anyone that hasn't read Lovecraft before, would you say those are good starting points?
Yeah, I think they're very good starting points. I think Pigman's model's nice in that it's kind of short and you know, you can read it in a fairly short time and it gives a sort of classic horror kind of story. My favourite story of Lovecraft story is definitely The Shadow over Innsmouth. So I think that was an excellent choice. And you can really talk about H.P. Lovecraft without doing The Call of Cthulhu, which is the kind of iconic and signature story. So yeah, I think that's a very good selection actually.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before we started recording that I had read the Neonomicon and Providence by Alan Moore, the Avatar Press comics. And I did enjoy Neonomicon, but Providence I was lost. There's a lot of H.P. Lovecraft references that I did catch while reading these stories, but I'm sure there's a lot more. But yeah, so it was definitely a fun experience to go in and have someone to help guide me through the Lovecraft journey.
He's got a lot of stories that are short horror stories away from the mythos. So if you want to delve into the mythos, you know, I selected those because, you know, something like The Terrible Old Man or The Strange, what's it called? The
Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Yeah, and was it Jermaine Fee? No, I'm thinking. Anyway, there's a couple others that are not necessarily mythos related. So for someone who wants to find out what Cthulhu is and all that sort of stuff, I think those are good entry points.
Mm-hmm. So I was doing a little bit of digging into the timeline and a little bit more of the mythos, and there's a long timeline that there's lots of articles and videos concerning the timeline and going back, I think, thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, I think. Kind of the start of kind of the journey. Is all that detailed in HP's stories, or is that pieced together, or is there other material out there that kind of builds that timeline and all the characters involved in it?
Well, I think there's some sort of degrees of interconnectedness between the stories themselves, so you'll see characters appear in between ones, but I think it was August Derleth, one of the guys who survived H.P. Lovecraft, and is one of the guys who's sort of probably responsible for his popularity nowadays. That sort of he really sort of codified and kind of did a lot of the stitching between all the stories to kind of give you this overall kind of mythos. I think Lovecraft would be a bit more haphazard in his, I think there was probably an overarching plan, but it didn't really come through. There's no kind of like, oh, this is how the mythos is and everything. I think it's a bit more subtle than that in the stories, and it was later writers that sort of codified it and gave it the overall structure that we sort of see today, probably.
Yeah, and I think to address your point about other authors, Steve, Lovecraft was a very prolific letter writer back in his day. So he probably wrote more letters than he did short stories and novellas. So he had a wide circle of other authors that he was happy to let them write into his mythos universe. So August Derleth being one of them, Frank Belknap Long, Robert Bloch, who went on to write Psycho, even Robert T. Howard. There's some people argue there's some Cthulhu in the Conan stories. So his sort of collection of letters is more extensive than his actual published works. And yeah, when he died, it was August Derleth, like John said, that he actually created a publishing house, Arkham House, to collect all the stories that have been printed on the pulp magazines and reissue them, some of them even posthumously. So we owe him a lot. Some people are not too happy, and they criticize August Derleth for what he did and the way he went about codifying and collecting all the mythos. But if it wasn't for him, certainly we wouldn't have what we got today.
It's interesting reading really influential stories like this, going back and reading stories and things like Arkham. I'm assuming that's where Batman, the Arkham Asylum came from. There's other references that you pick up on going back and reading these influential works. So it's funny how these types of stories will really change the course of culture and pop culture in really big ways.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I always find it quite fascinating how so much Lovecraft appears in other media. I mean, Batman's a great example there. You sort of the Arkham Asylum, and for those who don't know, H.P. Lovecraft kind of created this whole fictional Massachusetts, with Arkham and various places like the Miskatonic University. And it's really always fascinated me how the sort of threads of Lovecraft run through other media. You can see in video games and books and movies, TV as well. I mean, True Detective was season 1 had quite a thread running through it, although it wasn't strictly Lovecraft. It was part of the mythos. But yeah, I think Jose made a great point. It's this openness that he promoted during his lifetime, inviting people like Robert E. Howard to borrow his concepts, his universe, and adapting bits of theirs as well. That's always been one of the fascinating aspects to me. He was sort of open world writers, as it were. He opened his creation up to other writers and let them run with it.
So, John, where did you start with Lovecraft? Have you always been a fan, or when did your journey start?
Well, my journey kind of it actually started through Conan. I think when I was growing up, I was always a really voracious reader, and I exhausted all the kids' books in my local library, I think, and then eventually. I was always a big fan of comics and pulp tales and things like that as well. But yeah, I came to Lovecraft through Robert E. Howard. I was a big fan of the Conan stories, and there was a few. I can't whether I remember reading whether there was some cross references or of the material. I think Howard borrowed quite a lot of the Gribblies, the big monsters and unspeakable demons for Conan to stick a sword in their face. And after that, I kind of thought, oh well, if Robert E. Howard loved this guy, I must go check him out. And I started reading. There were great over in the UK. There were there were 4 editions of H.P. Lovecraft's tales and stories, and they had these great covers, horror covers on them with demons stuffing humans into their mouths and things like that. And I just found that irresistible. I thought, I've got to go and see what this is all about. So yeah, I came to Lovecraft probably when I was a teenager. First read him, and probably read all those books actually. And then many years later, I came back to Lovecraft through sort of game design and video games, but especially tabletop role playing games. Which is one of the areas I still work in nowadays. So things have come a great big circle for me with Lovecraft.
What about you, Jose? Where did you start with Lovecraft?
I was prepared for this question, Steve. Let me take you back in time. This is the early 90s, right? And my parents were concerned about the amount of fantasy reading I was doing. Like I was going to lose my mind, like Don Quixote with the chivalry books. So 1993 comes along, and one of the main publishing houses in Spain puts out this collection of like classics of literature for 100 pesetas. Like all you needed was like the denominational coin, like $1, £1, 100 pesetas. That was the coin. And they had these tiny, less than pocket-sized editions of literature classics. So they gave me the coin and sent me away. Go to the bookshop and see if you find something else. Go and broaden your mind. And I found in that little box, in the first edition of 1993, this tiny edition of the Dunwich Horror.
Oh, wow.
And for anyone that can see, it is literally kind of like just about finger height. And that's just Dunwich Horror, nothing else. And I read that, and that was me. The rabbit hole, down I went, and then I had to get everything that I could. So I've got all Lovecraft works in Spanish first, because I was a teenager. When I moved to the UK, I bought them all in English, and I've read it many times. Every so many years I go back and reread. And then obviously through the role-playing game, which I still play weekly, I'm still sort of immersed in that world.
Wow. Oh, so I'm way behind. So yeah, I think so. The one of the first short story that I read, the first one on the list was The Call of Cthulhu. I thought this was a great starting point for someone like me who has no idea. I mean, just general cultural references, but really no idea what the idea was behind it. But I think it was a great place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably is the ideal place to start. It's got kind of every classic element of the Cthulhu mythos. I mean, it's named after that's the story that gives its name to everything. It's got strange legacy. This guy who discovers his grandfather's papers. Mm-hmm. It's got weird cultists. It's got and an epic climax when the ship discovers this island that has risen out of the ocean and penetrates to this corpse city, as Lovecraft describes it, and wakes up a dreaming god that has lain dormant for centuries, managed to ram it with the ship and then make their escape, and just one man is left to tell the tale. But it's kind of like a curse that's also passed on, because each person who learns about this secret religion and these old gods meets with a mysterious accident, and it's sort of heavily implied that this god's cultists are, using poisoned needles to kill people off who learn about this strange, weird, forbidden knowledge that is underpinning this great secret that just awaits to be awoken. So yeah, I think that's probably the best place to start for anyone new to the mythos.
What I really like about that story is the layers, because you are reading about a guy that is reading about his grandfather's account of another guy. So like, you're next. Like, all these people are, doomed, and you are next for reading what they read, and I think it's really, so you're peeling the onion, isn't it? It's a bit like, sort of kind of like Cloud Atlas, that novel, where you're jumping into people's story's got that sort of 3 or 4 layers of depth that I think is quite cool to read.
Yeah, I think having that distance and having that kind of reading about finding someone's notes that felt like personal notes that they were experiencing something, having that distance made it scarier in some ways. It made it even more disturbing and creepy because it wasn't a first-hand account. It was someone who's already gone, and you wonder what was left out. Could you trust the narrator? How much of this is really happening? How much of this is influenced by someone else? So I thought that distance, and that's a little bit what we get in The Whisper in Darkness, is that extra layer.
It's almost like a sort of found footage thing that is filmmakers utilise, isn't it? And it's a bit a sort of later technique, but it's interesting, these different accounts.
And so, Steve, because obviously both John and I first encountered as teenagers, but how did you find the language reading it at a more mature, discerning age? Like, how does Lovecraft's use of the language strike you in the present day?
It wasn't as, I felt like it was very, very readable. I think all of them are so I was expecting it to be a little bit challenge. I don't mean it wasn't challenging in a bad way. I just mean it was very readable, very digestible, in a good way. But you can see the Poe reference, or the Poe influences throughout Lovecraft. I think the same kind of language and descriptions. I don't know if it was the style or if that was an influence from Poe, that Lovecraft, it was influenced by someone like Poe.
I don't know. I think John can probably add more color, because even John uses certain adjectives in his writing to pay homage to Lovecraft, isn't it?
Yeah, there are certain key phrases that you can sort of layer into your own work, like, you know, when the stars are right, or when the stars align. That's a very iconic one. Or, you know, the dead god lies dreaming. What doom it escapes me now, but you know, that is which is dead cannot die. Those kind of phrases. Yeah, I think it can be a bit challenging to modern readers. Some of the language, it does feel a little bit archaic, but that it's not impenetrable. Put it that way. That, you know, something, you know, even earlier Victorian or even you know, earlier English might be challenging, but it is very much of its time, I think, but not so difficult that it's inaccessible to a modern reader. I think we get it quite well. He likes quite long words as well, doesn't he? and many ways of describing the indescribable.
Yeah. But I think the language serves the stories well, because every main character in Lovecraft's stories is an erudite. It's always some university professor. It's always some doctor. It's always someone that back in the 20s, you know, the access to higher education wasn't that widespread as it may be in these days. So I think he intentionally used even archaic terms for the time to reflect and voice his characters.
Yeah, they do tend to be kind of quite academic backgrounds, don't they? Kind of learned and bookish men. You know, they're not the typical action heroes. So we say of pulp 20s and 30s, they're pasty-faced professors and men who've stuck their noses in books all their life, probably much like myself and even you, Jose.
Yeah. Got the perfect face for podcasts. Yeah.
But yeah, they're not your typical. You might choose as heroic protagonists, perhaps academics and professors.
Yeah, because in these 4 stories we're talking about, the 5, including Whisper in Darkness, in Pigment Model, they are artists. They are educated people. In Call of Cthulhu, I can't recall the first guy that is reading the accounts, but obviously he's reading about Inspector Legras, who obviously being an inspector of police. In Shadow over Innsmouth is someone that is taking like a break at university. Dunwich Horror, we follow Professor Henry Armitage from Miskatonic University. So in all his stories, they are all, people of letters and well learned.
Yeah, I think. Well, I had been reading McCarthy, and we read Frankenstein recently, so maybe that was why it kind of wasn't so kind of kind of jarring for me, because I've been reading that type of literature. But yeah, I found myself flying through some of it, that it just was very easy to read. If it flowed really well. And I don't want to say that it's wordy, because they're short stories and novellas, so it's hard to be wordy, but it was. He does like to, I don't want to say like to talk. It kind of, it's very drawn out, and not necessarily in a bad way, but it takes its time. It's very like a slow burn. All of them feel like slow burns, which is funny to say for a short story. But
he does like to throw a good adjective, isn't it? Nothing goes unadjectivized. And so, did any of these stories not work for you, Steve?
Let's see. I think they all worked. I do have some questions about the Pickman's model, because why I did enjoy the story, and I had heard about it before. I had heard, people had told me about how disturbing it was, and so it was fun to finally read it after hearing about it. I didn't know what the title of the story was, or even that it was a Lovecraft story. But I was curious how it fits into the mythos, because we do have the rats or what they describe as rats, and the creatures below, but I wasn't sure how it relates to the rest of the universe, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's kind of about the race of ghouls that are within the mythos. So they're carrion eaters and sometimes flesh eaters. They're this sort of race of under subterranean carnivores, I suppose you'd say, sort of semi-human dog-like features, and I think they do appear in other stories as well. They're kind of like a minor race. They're not really super well developed throughout the mythos, but there are. I think there is another story. Name escapes me now, where it is the narrator discovers that he is a ghoul. I think that's right. Is it?
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking about that one back on.
I wish I could remember its name. It's not the
other?
The Tomb, is it? Or is it the Tomb? I can't remember.
Maybe.
Now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is another story where the narrator discovers he's one of these things. But yeah, I think it's meant to be the shock that there is these kind of things are real and not the diseased imagination of this deranged artist.
And I quite like that story, because it's got one of those main themes in Lovecraft, that even though the narrator survives the encounter, so to speak, he's still left mentally scarred. He's got this phobia now of basements, and these are things that no one escapes unscathed. These encounters, they're always left physically or mentally unwell. And I think I quite like how he tells you that at the beginning of the story.
I think it's implied quite heavily as well that Pickman the artist may actually be a ghoul, or certainly have that heritage, because I think his grandmother's hung for being a witch or consorting with demons and things, and I think his baser nature eventually comes through, and he presumably runs off to join his underground flesh carrion eaters, which is probably hard to get artist supplies down there, but he's he's probably expressing his true nature through that.
There's a follow-up story to that. It's like more modern writer. Someone else wrote a story called The Other Pickman Model, which I cannot remember what it is about, but I got it there on my collection of new Cthulhu edition of different authors. So someone wrote that. So for anyone interested, it's called The Other Pickman Model.
No.
So many people have come back to Lovecraft and written all the stories that pick up from what Lovecraft left off. So many.
Yeah.
I didn't mean directly you, John, but I mean, because
Well,
so a lot of people have written like kind of prequels or sequels to Mountains of Madness and things like that. So
yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, it's true. You know, I've written for a few short story collections, and one was called Ancestors and Descendants, and that was, you know, prequels or sequels to particular Lovecraft stories. And I did one that was based on the Shadow of Innsmouth over Innsmouth, called the Shadow over America, which kind of we'll probably come on to have a chat about that in a little bit. But it is an interesting thing to sort of extend some of the things Lovecraft explored in fiction of your own, definitely.
It feels, and I've only read a few of the stories and the novellas, but it does feel like a universe that is ripe for more stories because it's such a great foundation. And there's so many things you can do with it. There's so many directions to go in. So it's ripe for more stories and to explore it and like Jose said, there's this damage that everyone has when they're even if they survive, and you get the feeling that they may not be around much longer for whatever reason. And also you start to wonder how widespread, and we'll get into more of the kind of the invasion of the takeover, but it does feel like this takeover with the cult in Call of Cthulhu and all the shenanigans that are going on there. It does feel like it feels more and more widespread as you get deeper into the stories.
I mean, I'm sure John can add much better color than I can, but what does a great job of expanding that universe is the RPG. Because the RPG, I had the pleasure of interviewing Sandy Peterson, who designed the game, and then reading these 4 stories now, it's like, oh my God, like the game captures so well the essence of what the stories and the themes are about. And then there are some fantastic long campaigns written for Call of Cthulhu that I've got there's a couple of guys in my gaming group. They don't read novels, but they will read Call of Cthulhu campaign settings. You're going to play with them because they've read them all, because they just like delving more and more into the mythos there. And obviously, John, you've written as well for the RPG.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think there's certainly through tabletop and role playing games they've expanded, but you know, you can also take a look at some of the authors who've expanded the mythos themselves. We mentioned Derleth earlier, but there's people like Neil Gaiman. You know, Stephen King has done stories with a mythos.
Ramsey Campbell.
A good friend of mine, David Roger, he wrote some amazing books based in the mythos. So, yeah, I mean, it really has, it really has expanded ever since. And I suppose as Lovecraft himself sort of continued to write all these stories, and it's a big body of work. He would expand on the myth. The mythos grows within his own stories as well. So I think Call of Cthulhu's 1924, and he was writing, much later than that. So obviously he probably developed them in his own way throughout the rest of the stories too.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about the graphic or the graphic nature of the violence. It wasn't as much as I expected it to be. It was more subtle, more of a, like you said, like a creeping horror. This is probably the Shadows or the Dunwich horror is probably the most violent or where the most deaths take place. But this one felt a little bit more up close and personal, the Pickman's model. So it felt, as far as gore, it felt like the goriest of the set.
Yeah, I think he uses it through. He has got quite a good range, Lovecraft. So he will do more conventional horror stories like Pickman's model, where there's a monster and it's eating people's shin bones, and biting heads off things and stuff like that, which is, we'd sort of say gore horror or body horror or something like that. But I think he does the psychological horror, I think, and the cosmic horror, which of course he invented this sort of idea that man is very small and insignificant part of the universe, and there are things out there that are much more powerful and would blow our minds literally if we knew about them. It's cosmicology or something. I think that we call it cosmic horror, but yeah, he has got a great range. He can do the Pickman's model, but he can also do the idea that there is this great, vast, uncaring universe which is just waiting to swallow you whole if you're not careful.
Yeah, when we get to the last, I have some questions about humanity, because we do get the feeling that we're insignificant, we're just sitting ducks. But I do wonder why the takeover isn't faster.
I think we need to sort of contextualize a little bit. Like at the time he was writing, there was a major changes in the world. Like Einstein's theory of relativity was may have just made it to the mainstream. It was only like maybe 10 years, 15 years before he wrote this. I think the race for the South Pole wasn't quite finished. So, Earth wasn't fully explored.
It's wild to think, right?
Yeah. So the Scott on the Munson race was maybe ongoing. Everest was still 30 years away. So we didn't know planet Earth yet. Then we discovered Pluto, which he calls Yugoth in his works. So all of a sudden, at the time he's writing, we are discovering new things, and there's more planets out there. We don't even know Earth. So I think he was reflecting all of that, and the whole takeover thing. I don't know. The problem is that there's always a very heavy price to pay to associate yourself with these, great old ones, outer gods, cosmic entities. So it's not a recipe for long-lasting life.
Yeah, and also I think there's the idea that their time is coming, but it's not quite yet. We could just be on the cusp of it happening, and it's only chance or the actions of a few brave men like the academics who are able to put it off for now. But it's still there. It's this looming threat in the future that is going to happen. I guess that is always more scary than perhaps something you have to confront now. That there's something coming down the line that is ready to pounce, as it were, but only when the time's right.
And so the first novella was Shadows Over is it Innsmouth or
Innsmouth?
Innsmouth.
Yeah.
This one was the very slow descent into madness. And I did like how we come full circle, and we start off with someone wanting to explore and kind of, I think we've all been in those small towns where we wonder what's really happening in this small town, or something feels off. So I think that can be relatable for everyone in some way.
To me, I mean, I disagree with John here, so we may get into fisticuffs. But I think the twist at the end in Shadow over Innsmouth it feels a bit forced. I think the Dunwich horror one is more foreshadowed, it's more hinted at. I think it's a better executed twist at the end. Whereas I think in Shadow over Innsmouth, our main character escapes Innsmouth, and then he discovers all these things that then, precipitate the descent into madness. And that felt a little bit forced, but maybe John can rationalize that a little bit better than me.
Yeah, I think I think the first time I read it, it's always hard to replicate. The first time I read it, it was like, wow, this is a great twist and a great surprise. But I think you do have a point there. I don't think there's any real, in the bit of the story where he thinks that these people are his enemies and things, there's no foreshadowing that he may be actually one of them. I mean, spoilers, obviously.
Yeah.
But the end is, that he's revealed to be the very thing he fears. But I think you're right. It's all done sort of post his escape, isn't it? He discovers that he's got these descendants and that he was related, and that actually now he's feeling these urges to go and live under the sea with his long lost relatives, half fish relatives. I think that does feel a bit forced at the conclusion of the tale. I mean, perhaps if he, had threaded some things, some hints through earlier in the story, that might have played out a little bit more. More naturally, but it does feel like it's sort of a little bit crowbarred on at the end. But I still think it's a great ending. I still love that ending. Well, we won't come to fisticuffs over it.
No, okay.
Flippers, maybe flippers.
So was he called to the place because he does have it is part of his family tree? Is he, or did he just happen upon the town? And if he just happens upon it, then it gives you the impression there's more people who have the family history, and there's the takeover is more widespread than we maybe thought it would be contained, but it feels like it's more people than we know. So you start to wonder who else has this in their family tree, the flippers.
Well, I think the way the sort of cycle works is that these people interbreed with the deep ones, who are the undersea residents who live near this town of Innsmouth, and as part of that, a child is born, and it seems fine up until adolescence, and then slowly, they start to make the transformation, what they call the Innsmouth look, bulging eyes, sort of losing all their hair, a bit like me, and gills start to form, and then they feel the call of the ocean, and they eventually descend into these wondrous undersea cities that the deep ones live in. But I think, I think probably the implication is that, hey, it could be you too. Do you know? Are you sure what was your grandmother up to, or your granddad? unless maybe you too will feel this sort of strange calling, because you're the product of a unholy union between mankind and a alien undersea race.
I think with hindsight, maybe the subconscious reason why he visits Innsmouth is because he's got the ancestry going on, even though he's not aware of it at the beginning. But I think it could have been threaded better, or even told you at the start that he was tracing. If he had said he was tracing ancestry, then the whole thing would make more sense than, like you said, crowbarring it in. But, which incidentally, sorry,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as an aside, Shadow over Innsmouth is the only half-decent movie adaptation. So there's a Spanish-American movie called Dagon, and they actually moved the action to a coastal village in the north of Spain. But actually, it's actually a fairly watchable movie. Every other adaptation is terrible.
Oh, right.
But Dagon is decent.
I wonder who owns the rights to his stories now.
No one. They're in the public domain.
Oh, wow. They're all in the public domain, which is, again, probably why they're quite popular, because
anyone
free
can
to use. There's no licensing, so.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so many audiobooks like on YouTube and LibriVox, and anyone can just do whatever they want with them. So.
Yeah,
because obviously he died without descendants. Yeah.
The one scene that really stood out to me in this one was when they come for him in the house, and he's trying to find the doors, trying to find a way out and trying to hide and get out of the town. I thought that was really great. That whole sequence was really great.
Yeah, it's very rare that Lovecraft actually sort of does an action scene like that, and it is really, you could, the tension as these, the door rattles, and he has to make his escape, and then he's evading these crowds of mixed humans and monstrous deep ones that are sort of lurking in the mist and the shadows. Yeah, it's really kind of quite pacey and actiony, which is not something you really get a great deal of in Lovecraft.
No. No. And also you wonder why they're chasing him. Do they know that he's a descendant? And therefore maybe they're not after him in that way. But
yeah, what would have happened if they'd caught him? It would be like, welcome to the club, bro.
Yeah.
You wanted to invite him to the family reunion.
Yeah, exactly. Come and have a drink down the Fish Inn or something.
Yeah, that was a pretty good one. I like that one a lot. And while I think to your point about action, I think with suspense too, all of it feels like a slow build up. It's very, very stretched out. There's not a whole lot of ups and downs. It's just very steady throughout the stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think those are the beats of the horror story. I think I've said it many times. I mentioned it to John when we had the conversation over on my channel, that I think horror's natural habitat is the short story. And all you're doing is a slow build towards this climactic ending. That has, you cannot stretch that out for a Stephen King 800-page novel. It just doesn't work. You can do over 40 pages. You can do over 4 pages. Any longer than that, things just get... you lose that. You cannot maintain that tension. It's just impossible.
I agree. And something with, we don't want to get on the Stephen King kick, but some of them are way too long. But that's a whole nother discussion. So I guess the Dunwich horror, this one I thought was interesting because we start off with the mother, then we start with Will, then we focus on Wilbur, and then we kind of jump around a little bit, and we end up in one place, and where we finish isn't quite where I expected it to go. We kind of jump around quite a bit in this one, different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the Dunwich horror. I'd put it amongst the sort of top 4 novella kind of essential novellas. Jose singling number 1 there, and I agree. I think it's got this real nice kind of like folk horror almost feel to it. There's strange people in the backwoods breeding with horrible entities and the consequences that come from that, and I really like that kind of I really kind of like that sort of folk horror aspect to it. And once again we have a couple of academics come to save the day, and
and the dog,
of course. Yeah, we can mention without the dog, but yeah, I love that. I love that, and it feels very rooted in sort of Lovecraft's America as well. I'd say that kind of Providence kind of area, just sort of lurking on the edges of civilizations out in the woods, and I really like the Dunwich horror, and the revelations are great, aren't they? The strange thing that is Wilbur, and the even stranger thing that is his brother or sister, I suppose. It's never really said. But I think is it said it's his brother or sister? I can't remember.
I love this story. I think it's got all the tropes of Lovecraft horror, all of them. You got the scholar, Miskatonic University.
Yeah.
You are in Arkham. You've got this sort of, like you said, backwoods village, quasi inbreeding degeneration that Lovecraft was so like icky about. It's got the Necronomicon. It's got the bloody whippoorwills. You know, as a Spanish person, when you're 13 years old, what the fuck is a whippoorwill? And then when the internet came, I've done this, and this is how geeky I am. I've been looking for videos to hear what the whippoorwills sound like, because I don't think they are. We don't have whippoorwills in Spain, and yeah, it's a pretty creepy singing at night when you hear it. So that stuck with me. The whippoorwills is something that I took away from that story.
There is another story with the whippoorwills, isn't there, where they're waiting to catch that guy's soul. I can't remember what this. Again, I'm
It is
terrible
here.
with titles.
It's when Wilbur Whaley dies, and when his grandfather is about to die at the beginning as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, the singing of the whippoorwills. What do they sound like? And the twist at the end, obviously, the first time I read it, you don't catch all the references, so it really took me. Like, oh my god! Like, this. I think it's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I caught the audio of this story. I was listening to the audiobook during my bike ride, and at the end, there's the narrator does a great job with when the creature is speaking at the end, and just I don't know if it would have had the same effect reading it, but the narrator did a really great job with the language and the voice,
Nice.
And so yeah, it really was effective.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and then Steve, so do you want to talk about the Whisperer in Darkness?
Yeah, I just want to mention, read by, it says various narrators. Never mind. I was trying to find the narrator for that story, but I'll put it in the description. Yeah, The Whisper in Darkness. This one was another one that we have the correspondence between Henry and the our main character. I forget his name off the top of my head. But this is the one where they didn't feel... You didn't really feel the threat because Henry is fighting them off by himself over a period of time with some dogs. And even though the dogs were getting killed too, didn't feel as intimidating until the very end, because you do wonder, why don't they just go in and get him? He's one guy with some dogs, and he can't be that formidable. But when you get to the end and you find out, you put it all together. I thought that was really great. I love the ending of this story.
Yeah, I think in a few weeks' time I'm going to start. I'm actually going to DM a Call of Cthulhu campaign, and the fungi from Yugoth make they are sort of the main antagonist of the campaign. So there's a lot of references to Whisperer in Darkness there. So I might recommend my gaming group to read it as homework before starting.
You set your gaming group homework.
Yeah.
I don't know if mine would stand having homework set for them, but you've got them well trained.
Well, we'll see. They're an unruly bunch, but yeah, I think to me that story doesn't stack up as high as Shadow or Horror, Dunwich Horror, but it's still effective. It's got all that mythos there, although the fungi are meant to be the sort of independent race, so they're not necessarily. I think in the RPG they are just this sort of. They're just sort of mining for metals across the universe. So they are their own thing. They're not beholden to any of the outer gods, and they seem to be their own entity. They're sort of harvesting knowledge across planets.
Yeah,
that's
it's the
why
Migo, isn't it? That are,
The Migo, that's it.
yeah. I mean, you've got to love an alien race that can put brains in canisters and body swap things and are part insect, part fungus.
Yeah.
It's a great invention, and the Migo are great in terms when you're doing if you're planning on doing a game design or running a campaign. They're an absolutely brilliant kind of monster to have in your game, because you can just do anything with them. You can discover a pile of right hands just stacked up. It's the Migo. They're at it again. What are they doing with the rest of the bodies? They've just left the right hands, and they've got weird super science, and Yeah, they can fly and all sorts of things. But the brains in the jar, that's definitely the brain cylinder. That's definitely the classic Mego thing, isn't it? You find a brain in a jar that's still somehow alive and able to communicate with you. I think that's just such an iconic thing.
Yeah, but there's certain willingness on the part of I forget the name of the scholar there that is willing to be completely, I don't know what's the word,
Transformed or something.
I don't know, this embodied, like, have eternal life and knowledge.
Yeah.
But there's a slight catch.
Yes.
Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah. And to weigh that down and go, yeah, I'll have that. I'll leave as a brain in a can for the rest of my life.
The other thing that I can never get out of my mind when I sort of see that is that scene in Young Frankenstein where Igor is going in to steal the brains from for the monster, and he picks Abby Normal as the brain. I just whenever I see brain in a jar, that always comes back to me, the Young Frankenstein scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was a good story. The end was very effective because we have the letters of don't come this way if you don't hear from me in a week. Contact my son in California and it's okay, you can come again. Like you can come and so we find out what's really going on. So I thought that was really, really great story.
So on the back of this, Steve, like, would you? I don't know. Would you say you're hooked? Would you say you're willing to delve deeper?
Yeah.
Into the madness.
Yeah, I have.
Nice.
I'm holding up the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft, the commemorative edition.
Oh,
it's like 1,000 pages.
I think that's the full works.
Yeah, it's a very nice looking book. That.
Yeah, cool cover. Very like a vinyl cover.
Very nice.
So yeah, I'm committed.
Do you think we should, Jose? Do you think we should make some recommendations?
Yeah.
Well, I think he's got the tome, so I think knowing Steve, he's just going to work his way through it.
Yeah.
I would say though, John, correct me if I'm wrong. The whole Randolph Carter Dreamlands stories are fairly skippable.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. That is definitely fair. They're worth reading, but they're not really core to the experience. You could probably skip those. I mean, the one we haven't talked about that I would say is the other great novella is At the Mountains of Madness, which is a truly great kind of a great one to read. My favourites are Call of Cthulhu, Shadow over Innsmouth, Dunwich Horror, and At the Mountains of Madness. Those are the four great ones for me. Yeah. So I'd go with that.
The last time I tried to read the Randolph Carter stories, I think it was back in April or May this year, and I couldn't carry on. I think it's 10 pages. It's like, I'm out. This is totally unnecessary. But Mountains, the first time I read it, it was a tough read. Shall I tell you a story about Mountains?
Go for it.
This is, again, there's after my intro to Lovecraft and after I collected all his works, I was young, I didn't know any better, so I was kind of associated with the Opus Dei, the religious group. And they check on your moral values and all that sort of stuff. And the priest asked me, Father Roberto, said, what do you like reading? And I was like, I love this thing, H.P. Lovecraft, and he was like, what's that? So it's all about these monsters and gods and stuff. And he was like, can you let me one to read? He wanted to check, whether I was consorting with the devil. I was like, yeah, sure. And I slipped him At the Mountains of Madness. Oh. And the poor priest came back to me a week later, go, that's a bit weird. But he gave me the okay,
Okay,
so my soul wasn't condemned.
It wasn't in peril.
Not yet.
Well, then yeah. Anyway, let's not.
Subsequently, maybe, but
Yeah.
not at that time.
Yeah. So yeah, mountains is a great one, and then I think to me the really weird one as well is the color from outer space,
Yes,
and
that's
but literally, it is what it says on the title, and it's very weird, very very weird.
So did he invent cosmic horror as we know it now? Is this the first or one of the first?
Pretty much, I think.
yeah. I'd say that that thing we talked about earlier, the idea it's cosmicism. That's what it's called. The idea that we're that the true horror of the universe is that there are these man is extremely insignificant, and there's these great powers that the gods and outer gods and elder gods and great old ones that are just we're less than ants to them. That is the sort of in a very bleak and unfeeling universe. I think that is the sort of real element of cosmic horror that he centralized, and it is. I think it's the very beginning of Call of Cthulhu itself. Saying that the great thing about man is that he can't put together all the pieces. I'm paraphrasing. He can't put together the pieces of what the true universe looks like, and he should be very thankful for that because it's a very big and scary place.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because one of his I don't know what's the word in English, like Clark Ashton Smith was around his kind of same time. But did he write because I haven't read him, was it cosmic horror as well, or was it more like sci-fi stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It sort of veers into fantasy a little bit as well. There's sort of horror elements, and yeah, I mean, it's not perhaps as pure as some of the stuff Lovecraft wrote, but it uses a few different things, I think. But I think it's fair to say that he kind of
they fed off each other, basically.
Yeah, but I think it's probably fair to say that Lovecraft, if not the complete creator, was the man who popularised it, should we say, and sort of first brought it to the attention of a wider audience.
But what is amazing is like the circle of all the writers that he had at the time. Clark Ashton, all of them very good in their own right. Robert T. Howard, August, the second best Cthulhu writer in terms of the mythos. Well, second only to John Houlihan, is August Derleth.
Too kind.
But August Derleth has got some really good mythos stories as well. And then obviously Robert Bloch, who went on to write Psycho. He was also part of his circle of sort of letter writers and stuff. So I think that's quite impressive, and that he maintained a super high volume of correspondence. Like Lovecraft was writing all day, whether it was letters or short stories. That's what he did.
And there's some you mentioned. There's other stories in the same mythos. Was the King in Yellow? Is that one of the ones that? That was part of True Detective. They injected the King in Yellow, and I'm not sure if that's where Carcosa came from, but that's also mentioned in the Alan Moore comics. And by the way, for anyone who's considering going out and reading those, they are very, very disturbing. So just a heads up for anyone wanting to read the Alan Moore Neonomicon or Providence. They're not for the faint of heart, so just keep that in mind.
Is that, because I think I've seen pages where because Lovecraft talks about unspeakable cults and things like that, and then Alan Moore went, I wonder what those unspeakable cults are, and he just puts them on the page, isn't it? So it's sort of fairly X-rated and gory rated and everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just quickly to go back to the King in Yellow, I think Lovecraft mentions him a couple of times, but just in passing. And I think the King in Yellow comes from Ambrose Bierce, who's an American 19th century writer, I want to say. But he was developed, the sort of real concept of the King in Yellow was developed elsewhere. I'm just trying to remember who now.
Well, like the big reference, because Lovecraft left us the essay, The Supernatural Horror in Literature, where he talks about all the other writers before his time that are sort of worth checking in his opinion and that influenced him. And he goes through a list of names there. So he talks about Ambrose Bierce and William Hope Hodgson as well, and a
Algernon
couple
Blackwood.
of Algernon Blackwood, yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
Proto-
Oh yeah, it was Chambers, wasn't it? Was the King in Yellow?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Chambers.
Yeah, a man takes refuge in a church after reading The King in Yellow. However, he is unable to escape his fate. The king appears to him in the church and transports him to Carcosa.
Yeah.
Did you find John? Oh no, sorry. Can I say what I was going to say? So sorry, it's going to come out all wrong. Like, if you really like Lovecraft and you want to read more mythos stories, no one quite matches up.
No, I think it's hard, isn't it? You know, to kind of, you know, measure yourself against the inventor or the original creator. You know, I don't think you're ever going to be quite. You know, it's very difficult to be as original like that if you're working in the same sort of genre, I suppose. But you know, I'd say that there are plenty of writers around who've done well to really extend and enhance the mythos. You know, we've named some of them already there, and there are still, you know, plenty of modern writers who have done a really good job of building on what Lovecraft started. I mean, one of my favourites, and I'm going through rereading them at the moment, is Brian Lumley and his Titus Crow stories. They're a very interesting take on the mythos and how man responds to this threat. And he's a little bit more in my kind of where I come from on the mythos, in that I like the cosmic horror elements, but I'm really a sort of pulp guy. So, you know, when these unspeakable things appear, I think the best response is to punch them right in the tentacles. So I have a less bleak view of man's battle against the mythos. And I think you know, there is possible to fight back. Difficult, but not impossible. But yeah, you know, there are. I think it's very hard to measure yourself against the original creator of anything. But what the great strength, I would say, of the mythos is the way that it's been taken in so many different directions. I sometimes kind of think of it as like a little bit of an omni tool for writers, because you can just take the bits that you actually want and need and use them in your own stories and go off and develop a whole bunch of new stuff that is just you, basically. Take whatever foundation or elements that you want from the cosmic horror side of things, and that's certainly something I sort of do in my own work. Well, I started out writing a bit more sort of conventional cosmic horror, and it sort of veered off into other directions, like sort of historic fantasy now as well as historical fantasy. So, but still using some mythos elements. So, but yeah, I don't think you can live up to the original, but you can just kind of do what you can with your own, what you want to do with your own work.
I wonder if, because there's a lot of, from the copious amounts of research that I've done in the last day or so, it does feel like there's a timeline. There's this huge world and details on the mythos, but I wonder how much of that is from Lovecraft and how much of that is other things other people have written, and if so, is there a group or somebody who is like the official who decides to make something part of the mythos, or is it just kind of whatever happens?
I think the RPG has got a lot of responsibility for that. I think Sandy Peterson codified a lot of that for the game. So, because I think even I've got the 6th edition guidebook there, a rule book. I think there's even like an Earth timeline that incorporates when the Grail Ones arrived, when the Shoggoth rebelled against them, and then when humanity sort of started. So I think the game codified a lot of that over different editions in there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely true of the, the sort of classic 20s and 30s Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos, and you're absolutely right. Those guys did a great, a great job of codifying it and sort of being the, the whole keepers of the flame, or the holders of the, keeping the flame alive. But in terms of literature, no, there's no. I mean, Derleth sort of was for a little bit, but now, people take it in any and all directions they want, from history to, outer space to, you name it. There's the mythos will be in there. There'll be a genre.
Some people even take it into the Napoleonic Wars, isn't it?
Some people do. Some foolish people take it to the Napoleonic Wars and write about the mythos there.
Yeah.
So it's, as you can probably tell, he's teasing me about my own work there.
You'd bring Cthulhu into the Peninsular War in 1805.
Yeah, absolutely.
Crazy people, yes.
Yeah, it's very versatile and can be used in a lot of different ways. So it's nice to see everyone else kind of have their interpretations and use it in the way they want. But it is a little sad he didn't have anyone to pass it on to and someone to kind of have it. But
it belongs to everyone. That's the thing. It's in the public domain. Like when I heard about the Actum Cthulhu, he was like, yeah, because like the Nazis were obsessed with the occult, so obviously Cthulhu must have been there. And I don't know, what would you recommend reading there, John? Because I haven't touched that side of it.
What, World War II?
Yeah.
Well, there's all kinds of weird war stuff. I have contributed somewhat to the genre myself with my I've got a World War II series there called the Seraph Chronicles. But there's plenty of other writers as well who've sort of explored Weird War II. I mean, you see it in movies like Overlord. Hellboy is a classic example. The Hellboy movies and the comic and stuff. So there's plenty there. But I think again, that just shows how adaptable it is. This great shared universe that Lovecraft bequeathed. And I suppose he probably didn't pass it on directly to any family member or estate or anything in the way maybe Howard or some of the other writers did, but he's kind of given it to everyone, which is quite some gift indeed, that nearly a century later we're still producing work and games and new media completely away from the book, printed page and stuff that utilizes Lovecraft's creations. I mean, you can scarcely see a video game nowadays without some Lovecrafty or Cthulhu Easter egg in there somewhere.
It even made it to South Park, isn't it? That's when you're mainstream.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah. Anything else you guys can think of? I know we could go on and on probably for hours about the mythos, but
would you be tempted, Steve, because you never really delved into RPGs, but would something like this, which is obviously there's never a happy ending in any Call of Cthulhu campaign, and that surely appeals to your nature, Steve.
Yeah.
Would you be tempted to give the game a go?
Yeah, if I had the time. If I could manage the time, yeah. That's the only hard part is because it's a tabletop one, right?
RPG.
Yeah.
Well, I think you got everything. You got tabletops, you got the RPG.
Yeah.
Everything.
I really like the, how can you not like the Cthulhu? I mean, it's just cool. It's like neat. It's very versatile, but yeah.
I mean, you've got that 1,000-page tome, so yeah. I would say enjoy. Some of the short stories are
plenty
fantastic.
of reading to do.
Some of the short stories are fantastic, even the ones that are not mythos-based. I think the one about, there's no spoiler for you, but the one about the careless undertaker is the first one I think I ever read in bed at night. And I was not happy about switching the light off after that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, we should do this again.
I'm happy to talk HPL anytime.
Anytime. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, give me a list and we'll do it again.
Sounds
Fantastic.
great.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
So until next time, Jose, where can people find you?
Usually, every so often, lurking in the page.chewin.com forums. Also, you can check out my YouTube channel, Jose's Amazing Worlds, and the podcast Fantasy Talks Live.
And John, where can people find you and your work?
Well, I'm on I'm on Amazon and a few book distributors, ebook and paper book distributors. I think you can get me through all the usual ones, Barnes and Noble and Apple and all that. But please do swing by my website, johnhoulihan.net, john-houlihan.net, I should say, and say hello. Always happy to have a chat with people. And thanks so much for a great talk tonight.
Yeah, thanks I know it's hard because we're all over the world, so it's hard to make it work. But thanks for making the time and coming by and chatting.
Oh, my real pleasure. It's been great, and always a pleasure to induct someone new into the cult. We'll have to go and sacrifice a few things tonight and burn a few candles to welcome a new member.
That's not a lava lamp, just for the record. That is a Shoggoth powered lamp.
Marvelous.
I'm a card carrying member, so I'm ready to go. So yeah,
Brilliant.
So until next time, thanks everyone, and we will talk very soon.